This time around, we are going to work in a method referred to as intuitive perspective. And though I appreciate you guys and your dedication here, feel free to sit down. I'm about to have to be a talking head for a pretty good while because I got a whole new technique to introduce you to. And in some ways, it's kind of two techniques, but you can't really separate one from the other. Intuitive perspective. So in a case like what you can see here on the screen, or the objects that are sitting out there in the still life, right? If we were going to try to draw this in 1 or 2 point perspective, it would not work, because all of our objects are going off in different directions. 1 point perspective and 2 point perspective really only work when objects are aligned, parallel, or perpendicular. Once things go off in different directions like this, you can't, because each individual cubic object has its own 2 vanishing points out there somewhere. And it would be ridiculous of us to try to figure out where those 2 points are for every single object that we would draw. So this time around, we're going to use a technique referred to as intuitive perspective that's going to allow us to take measurements to get these angles that we need. In addition to that, we're going to learn some techniques for taking visual measurements so that we can get our proportions correct. Because we're now going to start making some drawings that are meant to be accurate to what our eyes are seeing. So we can measure how tall should this object be versus how wide. How big is this object versus the one next to it? How high or low on the page should I put this object based on visual measurements that you're going to take? When it comes to intuitive perspective, which your syllabus also refers to as freehand perspective, I don't use that terminology very often because I used to, and I would have students who would think that meant the ruler was no longer needed. The ruler is still part of this, at least for now. But intuitive perspective, the nice thing about it is I no longer have to worry about horizon. I don't have to worry about any vanishing points. It wouldn't do me any good to put those on the page anyway for what we're doing. Taking my visual measurements is going to allow me to make this drawing accurate to what my eyes are seeing, but also I can scale it however I would like. At least starting off. I'm going to start off with some marks on the page that will then sort of determine the scale of everything else. So unlike, say, with 2 point perspective where I might have to draw smaller and put my stuff over to one side or another in order to get things to look correctly, I can start wherever I like, and I can work at a scale that I'm comfortable with. Now, even though we don't have a horizon or vanishing points, this works on the understanding that they would be out there somewhere. As I'm looking at the stuff that's in front of me, my eye level is up here, right? So it still works like intuitive, like every kind of linear perspective we've explored so far, in that if it's below my eye level, right, I'm seeing the tops of things, and the lower things get, the closer they are to me, and the more unforeshortened the tops of those objects should be. Anything that's above my eye level, that whole thing. And each of these objects would be going to 2 vanishing points somewhere. So in order to draw anything in intuitive perspective, and even when eventually the ruler comes away, intuitive perspective and these visual measurements that we're going to take are still going to be coming into play. I need to put myself in the position of that one-eyed observer with its head locked in place. So for me, this is going to be a little more difficult because I constantly have to turn around over here in order to draw and then take my measurements here. But as much as you can, you want to keep your head in about the same spot every time you're making your observations and taking your measurements. For me, I'm going to try to always make sure my 2 feet are right here anytime I'm taking measurements. All right? Because if I lean this way a little bit, the whole thing shifts and looks slightly different. If I'm leaning this way, the whole thing shifts and looks slightly different. So if you're one who has a tendency to bend down when you're drawing, make sure that you're always standing back up fully straight whenever you take your measurements. Then, something that we're going to do in order to take visual measurements and also in order to get our perspective down correctly is something that you'll want to get figured out. Now, there'll be problems with this when we actually start working that I'll point out when it happens. But you're going to take your pencil, for reasons that I'll talk about in a moment, and hold it at a right angle to your arm. Not pointing it outward, not coming back, but at a right angle to your arm. Right? If you've ever seen like stereotypical cartoony version, depictions of an artist at work, right? They're always like back like this and holding up their pencil or their brush or something. And it's because even though they're being goofy and making fun of it, it's something that we actually do. You hold that pencil out at a right angle from your arm, and then you close one eye to make yourself into that one-eyed observer. Because this pencil is now going to be a way I'm going to take measurements of things. And if I have both eyes open, I either have one pencil and 2 objects, because the object's split because I'm focusing on the pencil, or if I focus on the object out there, I have 2 pencils in my eyesight. So I close my eye, one of my eyes, so that I've got 1 pencil and 1 object out there. All right? So I'll talk about what this is going to do in just a moment. All right, so what I'm going to start with in intuitive perspective is the corner of some object that's close to me. For me, it'll be this corner right here that I'm going to work with of that object that's out there. Now, what scale should I make it? How tall should I make that? It literally does not matter. It can be as big as I would like it to be on the page. Because this is the one where I get to make the decision. It can be as tall as I'd like. That right there is now going to determine the scale of everything else. Right, out there, it's only about yay tall for me, but if I did that, this would be a very tiny drawing. I don't want to do that. All right, so now, what do I need? Well, I need now, if I were drawing in 2-point perspective, I'd need these lines going off toward one point, these lines going off toward another point. I don't have those points. So instead, what I'm going to do is, again, close one eye, put my pencil out at arm's length and at a right angle from my arm. And the reason we put it out at arm's length is so that the pencil is always the same size. Because if I bend my arm, the pencil gets bigger or smaller. This way I know it's always the same size. All right, and what I'm going to do is out here, all right, of course, holding it out in front of me, that's what I'm looking at. But I'm going to take this out like so, and I'm going to turn my wrist until my pencil lines up with that line right there. When it does, I know that I have the angle that I need to put right here. Now, again, for you, this is going to be nice and easy to take this measurement and then boom, come right down to your paper. I've got to like turn around and do this. So I got to be very careful not to let this slip. And it's why I've got to make sure my feet are back in the same spot. All right? So I'm closing one eye, holding my pencil at a right angle from my body, or my arm rather, turning my wrist until I have that angle. Now, well, I'll talk about that in a sec. Let's do this first. All right, so come back around here without losing this. So I would get my ruler, line it up with that angle that I have, and whoops, my thumb got in the way. I'm just going to pull that line outward. I don't know how long I need it to be yet. So I'm just putting some distance on it. All right, I'm going to do the same thing for these other 3 lines. All right, and then I can kind of visually check it because Again, this all depends upon the idea that there would be vanishing points out there somewhere. So I know that these two lines should meet somewhere eventually. If it doesn't feel like they are, if they feel like they're going outward away from each other, then I know I haven't done this correctly. And they feel like they'd eventually meet somewhere out here. Let me get these two lines up this way. Right. I also don't know how long that's going to need to be yet, so I'm just pulling that line out. And same there. And I look at those, and visually it looks like they would eventually meet at some point. All right, so now, if this were a 2-point perspective drawing, I would need to cap off that plane and cap off that one. But where? Well, this is where that right there is going to come in handy for me. So what I'm going to do, in order to get what I'm going to do is take this measurement. I'm going to tell this part first, and then I'll show. And I'm going to compare it to this out here in front of me. So I'm going to say, like, there's my height. How many of those does it take to get the width? Right? And how I'm going to do that is out in front of me, again, holding my pencil at a right angle to my arm. I'm going to line my pencil up so that the tip of that point of my pencil is right there, lined up with this corner, and then I'm going to put my thumb at the bottom of that corner so that I know that whatever remains of the pencil above my thumb is the height of that box. Like this. And now I know that is the height of my box. Not on the page. On the page, it's this big because I made that decision. Right? I'm going to take this measurement now, turn my wrist, and count how many I go this direction in order to get the width. There's one. It's just a little less than 2 of these. So 1. There's 2, maybe about right there. And I give myself a vertical line. This whole thing's a little wonky because my board was off a bit, but there we go. All right. Would that be about right? 1. Yeah, that'd be about right. All right. I'll do the same thing for the width. Take this measurement and compare it to that. It's just slightly more than one of these. So there, maybe about there. If I had an eraser, I'd erase out these extra lines that are out here. Right? Now I need this line, this line, and this one to cap off my top. So I'm going to take those measurements. Clearly, when I drew this, I angled this way up too much because this is not nearly as extreme as I have that. All right, so I'm going to turn my wrist and get this line back here. And then I look, does it visually feel like these three would all meet in the same place? Maybe not. That looks like it may be a little too extreme up this way. So I'm going to check one more time. Yep, I was off. By quite a bit, in fact. All right, so I'm going out that way. And I'll get this one. And that feels like it would be going to the same point as all those others. I am going to get an eraser. All these stray lines are going to confuse me. All right? So that gives me my larger box that's sitting on the bottom here. And it's pretty accurate to what my eyes are seeing out there. Now, I've got another box sitting on top of it. But it's at a completely different angle from the one that it's on. So I need to do a couple of things. One, I need to figure out where I should place it on top of my box. And then I need to figure out my angles, my height, my width, all that. So in kind of looking at it, I got this little space right here, from that corner to there. So I'm going to take this measurement again, because right now that's the one measurement I know is absolutely correct, and compare it to that little bit of space there, and just see how far that is. It's just a little less than half, so maybe about there, about right here. All right, I'm just going to give myself a vertical line from there. I don't know how tall I need it to be yet. So now I'm going to get these angles here. Again, I don't know how far I need it, so I'm just pulling the line out a bit. Okay. Now, also, why you need to be holding this pencil at a right angle from your arm. That right angle from your arm represents the flatness of your page. The things that are out in front of you, your brain knows are moving away from you. And so it's going to happen. When it does, I'll point it out to you, and I'll try to help you correct it. So your brain is going to make you do this. It's going to make you point the pencil away from yourself. Because your brain is like, that line's going away from me. And you'll turn your wrist and you'll get a line. But the pencil pointing away from you now no longer represents the flatness of your page. So that, let's say if I were trying to get that angle right there, which when I had my arm flat in front of me, my pencil at a right angle from my arm in front of me, looked like this. If I accidentally point my pencil away from me, that lines up perfectly with the bottom of that box for me, but then I come down here to the paper and my hand flattens the pencil out, and now it's going upward in some crazy weird angle. Whereas if I keep this at a right angle from my arm, I'm getting that correct angle. Right? Now, I want to figure out how wide this should be. In this particular case, I don't think I even have to worry about measuring the width this way, because it literally touches the edge of this, just like you can see right there. It touches the edge of the box. So I know right there I can just bring my line straight up from that. So that's what I'm going to do. Like that. But I need to figure out this width. And again, I know that I got this height is correct, so I'm going to compare it to that. So here's the height of that box. If I compare it to the width, maybe about 1 and a little bit more. So there, to maybe about to where I have it drawn already. I'll give myself a vertical. Right, I'm going to erase these lines out back here so that they don't confuse us, because I can't see that back there anyway. Erase this line so it doesn't confuse either. Now, I need to figure out the height of this box, but now I have something new that I know I can compare to. I can compare to that line, and I can say, all right, how wide is this box versus how tall? So instead of taking this measurement, I'm going to take the width of this box. I think it'll be easier because they look very similar to me. And I'm correct, they're exactly the same. So if that's the width, there's the height, right there, and then I'll just get my angles. Feels like those two would eventually meet that point. So now I need to get this angle. Those two lines look like they would eventually meet in a point. So now I need one and that one. Make sure I've got my feet in the right spot. And then this one here. All right. Erase all those lines out that I don't need. That now gives me an accurate depiction of that smaller box that's sitting on top at that angle that it's turned. All right, and I've got this cone that's sitting here. And so I'm trying to figure out where it should be. Right? I can see a little bit of this back corner. And then it's down a bit. Let's see here. If I make myself what I'm about to do right now is make myself like a horizontal line from that corner, and then see if this is above or below that horizontal line. And it's below it a bit, so yeah, so maybe about right there. All right? I'm going to say that's where this should be. That feels about right. All right, so how wide should it be? Maybe I'll use this one again to compare it, because the width, that's very small. So I'm going to try that again. So I'm going to take this, compare it to the width of the bottom. Maybe about like there. So I'm going to give myself a couple of marks. I'm going to get my ellipse to fit within that. How tall should this be? Well, it comes up and it almost touches the bottom of this box. So, but it doesn't completely. There's a little bit of space. So I'm going to draw my line here. And then give myself those lines that I needed here and here. Now I used that because I could tell that those were close but not completely touching. But I could also have done something like, here's the width of my cone, and then it's like a little more than 2 of these, a little more than 2. So it actually worked out pretty good. I can erase out the lines that I don't need. And now I have a fairly accurate depiction of what my eyes are seeing out there. So a few years back, I realized there were some students just absolutely struggling with understanding what we were doing, who, because of the way I was having to teach it up there, were having difficulty understanding that the measurements were happening out in front of them and things of that nature. So I took this series of photographs to try to show how I'm doing this, so that you can see things from my perspective, the person who's drawing. And so I'm interested in drawing this particular arrangement of things, this box, the cone on top of it, the smaller box here, and this sphere. So again, I can start off with a line on the page that represents the corner, a vertical line, and it can be as tall as I like. I'm the one who gets to decide how tall that is. And then holding that pencil at a right angle to my arm, I'm turning my wrist until it lines up with that, and that one, and that one, and that one. Then, although it doesn't look like it, and that's mainly because I'm trying to get a camera between me and this, what I'm doing here is putting my pencil where the tip of it is at the top of that corner and putting my thumb at the bottom of the corner. It's just the camera is a little bit off. It's not perfectly where my eyes are. And then I'm turning this way and I'm saying 1, 2, maybe about 2.5. So I'm going here, 1, 2, maybe about there. Boom, put my vertical in place. Take that same measurement again, compare it to that. And it's less, maybe about 1/2. So there, and I'm kind of like, maybe about there, and put in my vertical. Get myself that angle, and that one, and erase out what I don't need. Then I'm taking that measurement again because I know that it's accurate. And what I'm trying to do here is similar to what I just did over there. I'm trying to figure out how far away from that corner should this box be. And I'm kind of like, there-ish. And then getting these angles. And then somehow I forgot to take a picture of me taking a measurement. But I took a measurement of this height again and then compared it to the height of this box. So I would know where to put these lines. And as you can see, at one point I put this line in the wrong spot. When I realized it, I erased it and moved it out to where it needed to be. Oh, yeah. So I took a measurement of the height here, compared it to that. There. Boom. Now that I know that the width of that box is correct, I could use it instead of this to make a decision of how wide this box should be. And it looks like it's about half of that. So, boom. And then I get these lines here. Erase out what's not needed. Then I was thinking about this cone over here, which is pretty close to this corner. And I'm thinking to myself, I bet I could just eyeball where that should be. But I want to figure out how wide it should be. And I'm looking at this and I think, you know what? That and this look very similar. So let me compare. And I'm like, yep, I'm right. They're pretty close to the same size. So I come over there, give myself those marks as to where the width of it should be. Give myself that ellipse. Put a mark in the middle. And how tall should it be? Well, I can now say it's this wide versus how tall. A little bit taller than it is wide. So maybe it's about there. Put a mark up there to help myself draw my line in place, finish off my cone, erase out what I don't need. Lastly, I'm thinking about this sphere down here. And if I go back to where you can see it, I was like, all right, I can see a little tiny bit of the corner back here, but not much. So I was like, I bet I can kind of eyeball where that should be, but I do want to figure out how wide it should be. And I was thinking, you know what? It also looks like it's similar to the width of this box up here. So I took that measurement, compared it to the ball, brought it down here, left enough of the corner that I could see. Then since it's a sphere, I know it's going to be as tall as it is wide. And then I try to make my circle fit within those marks. Mucked it up a bit, have a wonky circle. So I just came in and fixed what was broken and erased out what I didn't need. And as a result, I have a pretty close approximation, pretty close representation of what my eyes were seeing out there. What differences there are between it and my drawing are probably more because of the nature of taking the photograph of the things out there and then taking a photograph of the drawing. But still, even with that, this is pretty accurate to what the photograph was showing. Okay? So that's what this technique is going to allow us. Now, again, when you're out there, make sure that when you're taking your measurements, keeping your elbow unbent and your pencil is at a right angle from your arm. It's going to happen that your pencil's going to want to point outward because your brain is trying to make you do that. When that happens, I'll talk to you about it and I'll point it out to you. So homework this week is to draw from that same interior space that you've done the last two homework assignments. Only this time around using, it says freehand perspective here, but intuitive perspective. So this time around, you can literally face any direction you want. It doesn't matter. You don't have to worry about whether you square your shoulders off with a wall or face into a corner. You can be where you like, where you are comfortable. If you want to give yourself a challenge, you can do something like what this student did and put yourself some objects out there that are at different angles. Right? Yeah, they stuck some speakers at like weird angles in the box up here at weird angles. This is again the student that went absolutely crazy with it. And huh?
Like it looked like a room in some sort of science fiction young adult novel.
No, it's just they have like a wall that's at an angle. This in the 1 and 2 point perspective, they had to fake that wall wasn't like that, but it's actually at an angle. And they turned their chair at an angle so they could have to think about the angles of it being different from everything else. This student drawing from a different perspective than they did in the last couple and having to measure the bed. Right? And they decided to challenge themselves by putting a binder in here at a different angle. They stacked some canvases in the corner so you can think about measuring those angles. Now here is one where this is a great example. It's done really well, but then something happens that I want you to look out for yourself. When you're drawing, just focus on whatever's immediately in front of you, right? You're putting yourself in that one-eyed observer's position, So if you have to move your head to look at something, don't include that in your drawing. Because that's what I think happened right here, where suddenly there's this line where there's an angle that goes really sharply upward like this. That's very out of perspective from the rest of what's happening here. And I'll bet you anything that table was like down here. And so they turned and looked at it and got their angle down here and then brought that to the drawing. Right? Focus on what's immediately in front of you so that your perspective can be correct. Again, kitchens are always good for this kind of thing. But even here, look, you can see mistakes that are being made. And this is one that I have as an example. Right? These cabinets are wider back here than they are in the front. They should be just the opposite. This student decided to challenge themselves by putting a vacuum cleaner in here and turning it at a slightly different angle from the rest of the room. And finally, the student had been drawing Velo this whole time. This was perfect for Velo because Velo goes off in all these crazy angles.
Hold on. From that angle, that person is standing on the bench that is up against the wall while drawing that whole thing.
Well, they may have been.
Eye level is about here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Eye level's here. Whatever. I don't know what they were on, but yeah, they're not sitting on the floor or anything.
They might have taken a picture.
All right. So.
That'd be cheap.
I know this particular student all semester was having to deal with students like staring over her shoulder while she drew. So I know she was physically there, but where she positioned herself, I don't know. Anyway, so next week, as I said, this was your last time drawing from these simple objects. Next week, we're going to move into a technique referred to as planar analysis, where we're going to take objects that are more complex, but treat the surfaces as if they still had flattened, foreshortened planes, so that we can start thinking about how to take these two-dimensional planes to create the illusion of three-dimensional objects in front of us. But again, as you'll notice, nobody's drawing the entire still life. Right? There'll be a big still life of objects out there. You'll be responsible for a portion of it that you find interesting. But again, it's sort of a step between the simple objects that we've been using with very simplified planes and more complex objects by taking the same way of thinking that we've been doing here and applying it to the surfaces to create something that makes us feel like we have a round bottle, a round pillar that it's sitting on, giving us the feeling of this bowl sort of curving inward and then down toward the bottom of it, things of that nature. All right, that's what we'll begin next week. So those simple still lives are finally gone. Oh, anyway, I forgot to show you this real quick before you guys go. That what you should have when you're done with all this, go away, is, shrink this down, 3 drawings of the same space that should showcase how differently each of these 3 types of perspective works. Anyway, you guys take care. Have a good week. I'll see you all on Monday.